Hello and welcome to In Conversation With, the monthly podcast series brought to you by the team that produced the Global Cosmetics newsfeed. 2022's theme is Future Proof. This month's topic is diversity in beauty, and I'm your host, Siobhan Murphy. A 2022 McKinsey report on the beauty market suggests that creating a path to a more equitable beauty market represents a $2.6 billion opportunity. And the road forward, while perhaps not easy, is clear. However, if the cosmetics industry implements the category growth strategies of the past, will it not produce the same results as the present, overconsumption? Or is there a third way? To help me answer these questions and more, it is my pleasure to introduce this month's panel. Hello to Charlotte Bunyan, Chief Strategy Officer at Cult London. A warm welcome back to Mimi Ghosh, Technology and Disruptive Commerce Banker at JPMorgan. And welcome to Rein, co-founder of CBO SIIA Cosmetics. Welcome, everybody.
Hello, great to be here.
Yes, wonderful to be back and exciting topic ahead. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for having us.
Charlotte, let's start with you. What are the social drivers that Cult have been tracking currently influencing the future proofing of a diverse beauty industry?
I think that's such a great question to kick off with. And certainly what we've been seeing is more of this democratization and reclaiming of beauty as defined by the individual, not a homogenous, Eurocentric and narrow set of standards. I think increasingly people are really rejecting perfection, and there's plenty of data that supports that. A recent Euromonitor survey looked at how people were defining beauty, and it's moving away from notions of glamour, for example, with half of the respondents talking about healthiness or inner confidence as the key determinants for beauty. There's many other things that we are seeing a lot of, in particular, the growth in male beauty or genderless beauty. We're also really, really pleased to see that there is a recognition of ageless beauty, and you can see how the beauty and wellness industry is really responding with innovations in the menopause space, for example. I think also that sort of recognition that there are still strides to be made and that we can be more inclusive and more accessible is certainly sort of something that we are aware of and that we are keen to push our clients as well to recognize, certainly, with the Purple Pound and recognition of individuals with disabilities. And I think also really importantly, this sort of more of a shift of the fun of beauty, that it's a way of sort of self-expression. And you can see with innovations in metaverse spaces, for example, that, there's a real reclamation of beauty as self-expression, playfulness, and not perhaps feeling a need to conform to a predetermined set of standards of what beauty looks like.
And at JPMorgan, Mimi?
Absolutely. When it comes to beauty, we all have one thing in common, and that's we're all different. And I think it's really beautiful to celebrate those differences, whether, that's from the perspective of race, age, gender, or, ability, needs. It's exciting to see the industry changing quickly and breaking free from the historical stereotypical view of what beauty means. And that's been sort of holding the global landscape back for decades. I think there's still wood to chop, but seeing some of those strides and investments being made across the board in creating a more diverse and inclusive industry have been really, really exciting. Companies that are drawing in, a broader range of consumers and making beauty much more accessible, either through exploring non-traditional markets and underserved communities, as well as, providing more personal experiences in how it's, product development and targeting its marketing and messaging have been hugely impactful. A Forrester study found that 77% of consumers have chosen, recommended, or paid more for a brand that provides a personalized service or experience. And Accenture also had a recent study which showed that 75% of consumers were much more likely to make a purchase when they felt a brand resonated with them and had something that helped to personalize or differentiate the offerings from what was across the mass market. I think a big part of this is also seeing how technology brings many of these trends to the population faster and creates a lot more connectivity among communities. In turn, you're seeing, many of those that were historically maybe not recognized or included in the beauty conversation gain a platform and be able to, sort of bring home their demands, their needs, and their ideas to the market much, much faster. You're also seeing just, from the success, whether it's Fenty Beauty is a great example of a brand that put inclusivity and diversity at the forefront of its brand messaging and how that drove the overall conversation around diversity in beauty forward, or global trends as you're seeing, K-beauty, trends from Ayurvedic beauty become a lot more accessible across the globe. I think there's so many interesting opportunities here. And to echo what Charlotte noted, yes, across, seeing more men's routines get traction with brands like Manscaped and Dr. Squatch, or even across the generational divide, whether it's, sort of ARFA targeting, perimenopausal and menopausal concerns, to brands like Evereden, which are really focused on baby and child personal care from a very early start. It's just been, I think, a wonderful opportunity to see how much these consumer trends and social drivers are elevating the overall industry.
And democratization, Megan, is that key to your brand, SIIA?
Absolutely. So I just want to echo what my two partners in this podcast have mentioned about the awareness, the new platforms where people are getting voices. You've seen really this demand for diversity and this real demand for brands to step up and not do what the status quo is. And so SIIA Cosmetics was actually created because my partners and I were already in a subset of the beauty industry called the independent beauty supply store market, which is a very powerful, important market that actually serves a large majority of the women of color in America, immigrant population, as well as rural women. So people who don't normally have access to, some of the higher end retailers, or just geographically are not close to them. And we noticed that these stores and this consumer base was not getting access to high quality cosmetics and high quality color cosmetics. And my partner being from South Korea, it made sense for us to look to the Korean beauty landscape, bring the best of the best to this market. And so by doing that, we like to say we're democratizing not just prestige beauty, but also Korean beauty in general, because up to now, especially the color cosmetic side, has been very sort of, inaccessible, not a lot of shades offered. And we like to say that we're following in the footsteps of other brands like Fenty that have already been named. And I just want to also add that, as obviously every country, every market's experience of this is different, but having been in the United States for the last couple of years, there's obviously been a tremendous amount of discussion around social movements, around diversity and inclusion. And the consumers, just like, Gen Z and millennials, are much more aware of environmental issues. They're also much more aware of diversity, inclusion, and wanting the, businesses that they buy from to represent their values as well.
Charlotte, what are the digital drivers Cult Beauty have been tracking currently, assisting the future-proofing of a diverse beauty industry?
There's quite a few different ones that we're observing. And I think some of the key ones are around new platforms. So certainly gaming, we're seeing that there's sort of a greater recognition from beauty brands, certainly, that this is a space that really they should be much more engaged with. Study just this year by Boutique showed that 91% of beauty shoppers are already playing video games, and 60% of them are playing games that involve the metaverse. And I think this again goes back to that, natural connection between beauty and playfulness. And these sort of digital platforms enable that sense of self-expression and an ability to sort of play, connect, immerse, and build communities. We're also seeing, again, sort of innovations that have been around for a while, but are just really driving sort of more traction. Things like connected packaging, a really simple way for people to connect their experience in store with storytelling around that brand, or being able to tell people more about provenance of ingredients, or actually connect them to other digital channels, including, for example, the brand's website, or possibly even their social channels. And I think, that's again a really smart way of using that small real estate on beauty packaging. And again, obviously, there's questions about what role packaging must play. Well, this is a smart way of making sure it works harder for brands. Clearly, again, something that we are seeing a lot of is virtual try-ons. And that's been something that, again, has really, really gathered pace, certainly over the last few years, where you're able to use those sort of AR try-ons to get a much better sense of how a beauty product might look on you. And that has, again, several studies have shown that increases purchase intent. I think there is a watch out with that, though. And I think, there is a concern. A study back in 2021, found that sort of younger people, that sort of 13 to 21-year-old cohort, who are using beauty filters a lot, it does drive a desire for cosmetic surgery. And I think that's really important for beauty brands to recognize their responsibility with the digital tools that they use. We've also, again, seen over the past few years a real adoption of creating virtual experiences for consumers. So whether that's virtual stores or virtual exploratoriums, and that really gives people the choice of being able to experience that brand in person, in store, virtually, connect with virtual assistants, and the role that AI plays is I think also an interesting sort of digital driver as well, which is to enable people to get much more personalized and much more specific advice that can help them. And again, we've seen a sort of real growth in startup brands, as well as more established brands investing in this and looking at how can they use AI as a way to really personalize somebody's experience of their products. And we've seen that in skincare, but you can also see that across sort of other wellness brands too.
And at JPMorgan, Mimi?
Sure. So from my seat, this is a really exciting question, just being part of the tech and disruptive commerce group and covering companies that are on that bleeding edge of tech and, sort of new emerging brands and services within the consumer space. We are seeing technology be a massive component in driving beauty forward and really shifting what historically has been a very transactional experience to one that is much more experiential and bringing and driving inclusivity and diversity along the way. With the onset of the 2020 pandemic, we've seen a lot of the digital and tech-enabled influence on beauty become accelerated. Brands and retailers engaged through sophisticated AR and VR applications, simulating real-life beauty counter and virtual makeup try-ons, live streaming, how-to videos, and master classes. This continues, I think, to be a significant opportunity to help drive and support new consumer behavior. And this shift to a more digital normal will help bring some of that cutting-edge beauty tech that brands and retailers have been experimenting for years to that forefront. I think innovation in the space used to be sort of a nice to have and now is much more of a must have. If you think about, virtual try-on and how that's been a game changer for diversity and inclusion, you've got examples of companies like Modiface, which was acquired by L'Oreal, Perfect Corp or Il Maquillage, all integrating AI and digital systems within the platform to help expand underrepresented consumers in shade matching or seeing what products may suit them in a way that's much more accessible. It takes some of that guesswork out of the purchasing experience and creates a much more fun environment for try on and experimentation. I think some other digital trends that have been really interesting and amplifying growth in beauty have been things like creating that community and education, whether that's through virtual masterclasses. You've had companies like Blue Mercury as well as Ulta Beauty report far greater consumer engagement. I think Blue Mercury, after holding a number of virtual masterclasses in 2020, reported sales tripling and order values doubling. Similarly, Bobbi Brown, the brand saw conversion rate increase and over 10 times the average order value after implementing some of these sort of community engagement and class style platform, class style content on their platforms. I also think some other sort of areas of tech that are really interesting include, sort of 3D printers, or that trend of bringing expensive spa treatments to the home, whether that's, companies like Beauty Bio or some of the light therapy businesses starting to create much more accessible at-home treatments that for a long time were sort of out of access to many of the consumers that are interested in experimenting with beauty. I also think it's really interesting to see how early stage companies like Xamface, with sort of technology that matches influencer characteristics to consumers looking for an influencer with the same either complexion, hair type, or beauty needs to provide recs to them. You're starting to see some of these types of companies help make those connections among influencers, marketing, as well as consumers. And, sort of the last sort of area that I'll hit upon is really across, sort of a personalized experience that's leveraging logistics and data in order to drive, more targeted sort of product development, and how that could benefit in creating a much more diverse and inclusive beauty landscape, whether it's, sort of thinking through, certain demands and collecting that data and using that to drive forward innovation or improve upon logistics and, sort of ingredients collection, so that there is a more accessible view for consumers to access different types of products and solution-oriented services and products. That I think is a huge value proposition for brands to be offering to the consumer base. And we're just really excited to see, how technology and digital can continue to accelerate the diversity within the beauty landscape.
And at SIIA, Megan, what digital technologies are assisting your brand?
Thank you. So digital technologies are sort of a double-edged sword for a newer brand, in that there's so much exciting innovation, but not all of it is, accessible for newer brands. What I'll say is what's really been helping us, and I think driving the entire industry towards future-proofing diversity, is just this immense amount of data collection that's been happening in the past 15 years. We often talk about the negatives of data collection, which obviously there's a lot of negatives, but one thing it's really done is help the entire industry understand the size of these different consumer niches and how much money they're really spending, which then drives forward the understanding that diversity is not just a nice to have, but it's also a necessity. So for example, the market that we are in, the independent beauty supply store market that we launched in, is worth $19 billion, which is almost the size of the entire prestige retail market. And 10 years, 20 years ago, the size and scope of that market and the true cultural impact of the consumers that buy at that market was not fully recognized. And so things like, venture capital funding, like bank loans, like manufacturers, it's very hard to get outside people to invest in brands that do focus on diversity when you don't have the numbers. Additionally, as great as some of these AI and digital try-on technologies have been, the first generation of them were really focused more on people of European descent, and they left a lot of other skin tones out. And what's really exciting, and something I think is really going to future-proof diversity, is this new focus on creating AI and creating try-on platforms that also really focus on diverse skin tones. So for example, a new company called Parfait in the hair extension and wig space just got funded by Serena Williams, and they have AI focused on matching women of color with different wigs and hair products. So I think those types of technologies are going to continue pushing the entire market forward with much more diversity and inclusion. And SIIA, of course, is part of that.
Indeed. So Charlotte, what are the environmental drivers Cult have been tracking currently future-proofing of a diverse beauty industry?
I think it's really, really important to sort of say that, those sustainable environmental factors are so front of mind now for consumers. There's, that real sort of focus on conscious consumption, and, the beauty industry and wellness industry has really historically not been quite as good as this as perhaps it could have been. And I think certainly the question around packaging and how can you ensure that the packaging that is there is forming a clear purpose and of value, and where, if possible, can you strip away that packaging. And we've seen obviously lots of innovations with products that are doing away with them, shampoo bars for example, where you have very, very minimal packaging, and that again I think connects to this sort of desire for how can you sort of reduce elements of products in order to not just have a better and more sustainable environmental impact, but also that drives down cost potentially for a wider audience in order to be able to sort of purchase those items. Certainly things like the reduction of water in products, using base ingredients to which water can then be added, and there's various subscription beauty kits now that are following the lead from many sort of cleaning subscription products which have done the same. Forgo is one example, but there are many others. I think also it's really important to stress that there's also a sort of big flag around greenwashing, and that it's really important for consumers to believe in what brands are telling them about their sustainability credentials, and certainly again questioning sort of things like clean beauty, vegan products, are they really living up to those promises? I think also a look from many brands at how they can use sustainable ingredients in the creation of their products. Territory is a great example of a clean skincare and wellness brand which focuses on sensitive and eczema-prone skin. It's really focused on looking how it can use those sustainably sourced all natural ingredients such as sea moss, plantains, aloe, in order to create a product that delivers on its efficacy but also is sustainably created. And I think alongside that, a recognition that where those natural ingredients are perhaps in shorter supply, where can lab grown ingredients sort of fill that gap and still ensure that we are protecting and delivering on that sustainability process. Finally, I think another thing that connects with both environmental and sort of digital tools is the use of AI to really, really be smart about managing sustainable stock levels and inventory management, ensuring that products aren't overstocked, that we aren't then sort of creating a sort of a landfill situation of unused products is really, really key. And I think AI has a really important role to play in that, which will help deliver a more sustainable industry for the future.
And Mimi, what environmental drivers do you see impacting the future proofing of a diverse beauty market?
Expanding on what Charlotte shared, I agree. I think, key environmental factors across the beauty landscape are, going to be that sort of responsible and sustainable sourcing of ingredients, as well as the continued trend of greater transparency of ingredients and materials and sourcing that are being used. Consumers are demanding this, and we're seeing, as education gets further and farther into the population, just how important many of these things are that perhaps, earlier were more sacrificed in favor of ease or pricing or solution. I think it's becoming much more table stakes to think about what environmental impact and drivers beauty companies are having, and how that expands or limits the various consumers from accessing different solutions and active ingredients. As this sort of discussion around transparency and sustainability become much more seen as table stakes, more brands that target diverse populations, both from a physical appearance perspective as well as from a needs perspective, can integrate many of these best practices into how they're delivering and creating new products in the future. I think a couple of things that I'll double click on that Charlotte sort of touched upon as well are thinking about, how do ingredients cater to a broad range of needs, and where are there opportunities for expansion? How can you, from a logistics tech perspective, either through partnering with companies like an Anvil or Suchi, be able to really optimize and streamline the way that you're sourcing materials and tracking all of that, sort of responsible sourcing for your manufacturing processes. I also think it's sort of interesting to think about some of the waterless beauty trends that we've seen, such as shampoos and conditioners from Ethique or others, that are really working in tandem to try to provide greater access to consumers and, reduce costs, reduce, economic footprint, and perhaps provide, high quality products at lower costs or, in a more economically friendly way as they, sort of take out the water and the weight from some of these products. And I also think it's kind of interesting to think about some of the synthetic beauty trends or synthetic ingredients and how that could potentially increase accessibility of different ingredients to consumers, and without, within an ethical way that's not, impacting our environment, to provide the same sort of quality of solutions and actives to consumers that are looking for those things. So I think there's quite a bit around how focusing on environmental drivers can also go hand in hand with increasing accessibility and providing, an even broader set of solutions for a very diverse population of consumers.
And for your brand SIIA, Megan, what are the environmental drivers impacting you?
Yes, thank you. So we are a newer brand, but it has never been more exciting, and there's never been more opportunity to really be able to bring in some of these sustainability efforts. When we ordered our first order of products in 2019, the options for things like packaging, et cetera, were nothing compared to what's out there now for similar pricing. So the fact that the whole world has sort of been having this conversation and that consumers are really driving it allows us as a brand to really be able to bring in more of those solutions. The other thing is we create all of our products 100% in Korea, formulate them 100% in Korea. And one thing I really love is that a lot of Korean manufacturers have been focusing on technologies for actually extracting the essences and the effective properties out of ingredients in a much more effective way that retains the nutrient density, but also is better for the environment. So some of our products are actually extracted using an ultrasonic extraction method, which means instead of using heat, which is how the majority of ingredients up to now have been extracted, it uses, ultrasonic vibrations, which actually, one, makes it much more effective for use on your skin, because of course heat can damage some of the effectiveness, but it also reduces the heat needed in that process. And additionally, a lot of that technology is starting to go to water purification. So places like the Middle East are going to be able to start creating their own products there as they're able to purify seawater using these same technologies without having this massive impact on the environment. So it's a very, very exciting time. Lots of technologies coming out. And we're very focused on being able to give our consumers sort of everything they need in one streamlined line. Now, the one caveat I'll say is that we continue to also focus on our main mission, which is bringing prestige beauty to everyone. And as we continue expanding as a beauty industry, we need to keep in mind that we don't get so myopic with one goal that we leave out another goal. We don't want, the beauty industry to sort of split into one sector of beauty products that, because of the consumers' income levels, are able to bring those high quality products, the sustainable packaging, et cetera, and leave everyone else behind. So it's really a balance, and it's making sure that consumers are able to get what they need at the price point they can pay.
Super interesting. Ultrasound. So Charlotte, what are the regulations that Cult have been tracking currently, aiding or abetting the future-proofing of our diverse beauty industry?
This is a really interesting question, and I'm going to respond in a slightly controversial way to say that in many ways, the beauty industry is pretty unregulated, and certainly in terms of things like ingredient provenance, there's really sort of quite a lack of regulation, which can prove sort of challenging for consumers to sort of understand, for example, what is really meant by organic. What I think is particularly interesting from Cult's perspective is that there's much more that we're seeing with brands taking action in their own hands, and certainly things like in France, there's advertising regulations for social media in order to ensure that there's explicit labeling of retouched images. And I think that really feeds into the responsibility that the beauty industry and beauty brands have to sort of address the issues of mental health and sort of well-being that many people are sort of struggling with as a result of perhaps rather unhelpful and rather sort of poorly sort of projected images of what those norms around beauty should be. And it's great to see things like Dove's partnership with Getty Images to create an image bank that reflects a much more representative and inclusive cast of beauty. And although that isn't regulated, I do feel that that is the direction of travel that we're beginning to see, as there's other obviously sort of acts in place, such as the Crown Act, which is around race-based discrimination on the basis of hair texture. And again, this is an initiative that is supported by Dove, and recognizing the sort of the need for more brands to cater to natural hair textures of all types. And although some of these aren't explicitly regulations, I think that there's an appetite from consumers to see more consistency in the way that beauty brands are showing up. You can see that, for example, with the online campaign Pull Up or Shut Up, which is, off the back of sort of, Black Lives Matter, where they're really holding beauty brands accountable for changes that they want to see. And even if those regulations don't exist currently, and it's always important, obviously, to be looking forwards and anticipating what regulations might come into play, I think being proactive as an industry to address what we're seeing in terms of consumer appetite, but also to head off some of those challenges that I just flagged around mental health, well-being, lack of representation, ensuring that we are sort of portraying and encouraging a much more diverse reflection of beauty is really important. And much of that starts, in fact, with hiring practices, that beauty brands need to ensure that they are building inclusive and diverse workforces, because that will ensure that they are reflecting back the thoughts, concerns, needs, desires of a diverse audience.
And Mimi, should it be brands who are proactive about the regulations of future-proofing a diverse beauty industry, or should it be government-led?
I think this is a great question. And from my perspective, I think it should be both. Regulation can have a very positive impact on the industry. And it's exciting to, see some of the brands take that initiative, as Charlotte highlighted some of those examples, but would also be great to see, the government take some positive strides in this area as well. An example, Europe has often been sort of a leader in thinking through, the regulatory environment as it pertains to ingredients and, banning toxins and trying to really have a stricter criteria for what consumers are putting in and on their body. But we are starting to see some of that gain traction here in the US, with California being one of the first states to declare a ban on 12 ingredients that are already banned by the EU, and that should go into effect by 2025. And on the back of that, you're also seeing many brands proactively drive forward the conversation around transparency and helping to address some of that appetite from consumers to have more sort of clean label and understanding of what is going in and on their bodies. Beauty Counter is a great example of a company that, emphasizes ingredient transparency and, has restricted, I think it's 1,800 ingredients versus, the 30 that are in, US government guidelines. And so I certainly think that there's, an opportunity for both the government and brands to really be proactive. A couple of other areas that I think are interesting that we may have touched upon briefly earlier in the conversation, but around data-driven cosmetics and tech trends, I think, the responsible use of consumer data by brands and by providers to drive product development and serve the needs of a broader consumer base is, incredibly compelling. But on the flip side, wanting to make sure that we're maintaining privacy and data integrity, and how in this sort of evolving world and landscape we can, help to protect consumers from, misuse of their data. I also think, thinking a little bit about, and Charlotte mentioned this with the media imaging restrictions in France, likewise, I think looking at how some of these amazing, virtual try-on and other types of technology can blur or create, sort of a photoshopping effect for products. And that needs to be something that I think we keep an eye on, as well as thinking through protecting IP for brands. Oftentimes, those brands that are sort of stretching and creating a product or solution for an historically underrepresented group, will quickly get replicated or, sort of see larger brands come in if there's proven traction for the solution or the area that the sort of emerging brand is creating a market for. And that can put a lot of pressure on earlier stage companies, founders, creators. And, I think there should be some, thought to how we support innovation in a responsible way. And so I think there's a lot of great positive impact that can be there. And certainly, to your point, Siobhan, there's an avenue for both brands and the government to work together here.
Indeed. And for your brand, Megan, SIIA, what are the regulations aiding and abetting it?
Sure. So we, like I mentioned, produce all of our products in Korea. And so this conversation around clean beauty has been very interesting because the Korean cosmetic world is regulated very differently than the American cosmetic world. In Korea, cosmetic factories are regulated in the same way that a pharmaceutical factory is regulated. And so the requirements on ingredient quality, on health and safety, cleanliness, are significantly higher than a lot of other places in the world. And so when we initially started working on our production over there, we sort of took a sigh of relief that, hey, we're going to be having really high quality products. We don't have to worry. And then as the clean conversation has gotten bigger and bigger, it's a wake-up call to all brands that if you're not also focusing on ensuring that certain ingredients aren't in your products, like what my two counterparts have mentioned, that it's going to lead to consumers leaving you, right? It's not just a nice marketing thing now, it's that consumers expect that. So we were very, very clear on what ingredients we didn't want to include, things like parabens, mineral oil, BHT, and we're continually evolving that as this definition of clean and natural have continued to expand. And I will mention as well, someone already said this, echoing that the US market is pretty unregulated, especially in certain terms that are used in marketing, but there's private industry groups and private companies that are now trying to set standards for the entire industry to follow, places like Credo, and others that have already been mentioned. And so just this discussion around cleanliness, around transparency ingredients, some of the states passing laws are really pushing the entire industry forward, which is really exciting. But I do want to echo what Mimi said as well, is that for newer brands that are either being innovative or trying to solve some sort of inequity and trying to provide access to products, sometimes bigger brands can actually influence regulations that end up choking out sort of smaller brands' innovation or niche consumer bases. So I do agree there needs to be a balance. Obviously, everyone wants everything to be super clean and super healthy and natural based, but at the same time, we need to make sure that we're not so myopically focused on any one goal that we're leaving out other goals around diversity and inclusion.
Indeed. And finally, Charlotte, what would progress look like in 12 months' time?
That's a great question. And I have a sort of longish wish list, really, which is, I'd love to see a beauty industry and a reflection of beauty across all sort of comms and marketing channels, which is wildly varied, non-gendered, ageless, playful, connected, supportive, and sustainable. And I think also one thing that we're sort of seeing much more of, and I think really plays into that goal of a more diverse beauty industry, is a real growth in content plus commerce models, where brands are really investing in their content series as much as their products. So providing edutainment experiences that offer value just beyond that purchase moment. And I think that's a really sort of great way of addressing some of the things that we've already talked about earlier in this conversation, being able to sort of help inform, be able to help sort of educate, be able to represent, and be able to support consumers in order to make more informed choices.
And for you, Mimi, what would progress look like in 12 months' time?
I 100% echo the sentiment that Charlotte shared. I think to make a real impact and inspire consumers, I want to see brands be really authentic in their approach and understand that diversity and beauty and inclusivity is not just a marketing tactic, but really an essential practice to listen and collaborate with their consumers and communities to create a really successful and meaningful ecosystem. Inclusion is, a necessary and ongoing process that needs to be thought through during, each phase of a marketing or product development process. I'm excited about the strides that we've made so far in creating, a more inclusive and diverse industry than perhaps, generations before have seen. But I do absolutely want to see that continue to expand. And, my hope is really that we see a truly equitable industry where no consumer feels or could be categorized as underrepresented, or there isn't, sort of a solution or product that they'd like to have that just isn't available or accessible to them. I think, 73% of U.S. adults agree that the beauty industry plays upon, insecurities in the market, and most of those individuals agree that the idea of beauty is way too rigidly defined even today. And so I think there's a lot of opportunities for the industry to evolve away from these negative perceptions and really empower the consumers that they're serving if they're able to create a much more collaborative and inclusive environment, even from a perspective of marketing and advertising, being able to show that there, are different ways to be beautiful is something that resonates with many, American consumers. And I think the successful brands and companies going forward will recognize that demonstrating that strong and very authentic commitment to diversity and inclusion, whether it's through, their own employment of their teams, product development, marketing efforts, fostering a community, thinking through how they're sourcing, all of that will drive inspiration and ultimately win support from consumers and create a much more, mutually beneficial ecosystem that we can all be excited about.
And finally, Megan, what does progress look like for your brand in 12 months' time?
Thank you. So we are very, very focused on serving historically underserved communities and populations. And so for us, that means we launched in, like I mentioned, this independent beauty supply store market that serves women of color, it serves rural women, it serves professionals, but now we're expanding that definition internationally. And so we're going to countries like Colombia, where, they've sort of been left out of all the innovation and the excitement around new products and diversity, around shades, around age, around the definition of beauty. And we're bringing that there as well. And then places like the Middle East and Asia, where the definition of beauty is even more, closely defined than America right now. So really pushing the envelope of what does beauty mean, who deserves to be included in that definition. I totally agree. And from an industry perspective, I want to echo Mimi. I really want us all to focus on authenticity rather than exclusivity, because part of the reason the industry hasn't felt great for a lot of people, myself included, is it's always defined itself based on what it's not or who it doesn't serve, as opposed to a more positive focus on what it does do and what the story is for each brand. And I think part of that I'd really like to see is more and more companies being led by and driven by actual users of cosmetics, as opposed to, people who maybe haven't used products. They just think about it from a, dollars and cents perspective, because beauty really is this very internal, personal thing that affects all of us, and it impacts how we see ourselves. And it's not, diversity, inclusion isn't just checking off a box. It should be just the air we breathe at a certain point. And so we're hyper-focused on continuing to expand our mission of bringing, the best possible products, streamlined Korean beauty to as many people as possible, because we believe that everyone deserves beauty. And so I'd love to see the rest of the beauty industry, follow the example of so many amazing brands that are really championing that message.
And with that, I would like to thank my guests, Charlotte, Mimi, and Megan, for joining me today, and to you for listening.